going to start. Andy's just going to give a brief rundown on his thoughts of key takeouts from CES, and then Robert and Vicky, you're going to say some words as well, just around IoT and smart home. And then we'll obviously throw to Q&A at the end. We'll probably try and wrap things up by 15:15. Without further ado, Andy, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, no, look, thanks very much, John. I'll keep my comments fairly brief and let Robin and Vicky speak. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's great to see you here. Obviously, CES is a pretty important conference, and one of the things that sort of strikes me is the 12 months goes by in a flash, as I'm sure you all experience, but then when you come here, the rate and pace at which technology innovation is moving forward is always brought about, in my mind, by just sort of seeing the changes that you see here at CES. As I sort of think about, what's my big takeouts, I mean, we haven't actually finished yet, we've sort of got some more time on the floor today, but I wouldn't say there was any particular, it's more thematics to me than particular technologies.
Wasn't it vacuum shoes?
Sorry?
Wasn't it vacuum shoes?
The vacuum shoes, yeah. There were some connected shoes last year, right, as I recall. But I think the thematics for me are, firstly, IoT is definitely sort of coming to a realisation. I mean, it's been talked about conceptually for a long period of time, but you're really starting to see the bringing together of some significant applications and use cases with some, on the tech side, the supply, or rather the underlying tech capability. And I think if you bring the sort of, probably the big thing coming out is the assistants, what I would call the assistants. So, hey Google, Alexa, Apple obviously working on theirs, continue working on theirs with Siri, and then Microsoft as well. And you sort of bring the assistants with IoT and the smart home. There's just this whole sort of, if you like, critical mass that's been created in that, where I think that whole space is really going to take off. And there's so many different use cases, and if you sort of walk around the floors, I mean, the most bizarre one to me, as I said yesterday, was the smart pillow. Yes. I'm not quite sure we need the smart pillow, and as I said in the interview yesterday, I didn't quite realise I was making a pun, but I couldn't quite get my head around that. But that, and a lot of the stuff is probably going to be superficial and ultimately not really very practical. But the underlying tech innovation that it's driving is going to be pretty significant, and that integrated with the assistants and then the artificial intelligence that sits behind the assistants, I think is one of the big themes. The other thing I would say, there's a lot on autonomous driving as well. I mean, you would have seen if you went on the floors. I mean, when I came to this show 2 to 3 years ago, there weren't any car manufacturers here really in any significant way, and then sort of Tesla has led the way in terms of really thinking about user interfaces and tech and in the car. And now, if you go walk around the floor, there's virtually every car manufacturer has got some pretty interesting stuff that they're doing in terms of the customer experience, autonomous driving, in conjunction with the whole sort of experience within the car. Another thing I saw, which I thought was pretty incredible, was I don't know if you guys saw it, the driverless electric Formula One car. I mean, if I was sort of Lewis Hamilton, I'd be probably be a bit worried by now. I'm not quite sure what the Australian Grand Prix is going to look like without any drivers, but there you go. So that was pretty cool as well. So autonomous driving, lots of that sort of stuff happening. And I think the other thing, not so much necessarily coming out of here, but a little bit coming out of here, we'll see this absolutely at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona at the end of February, is that 2018 is going to be a very, very significant year for 5G. Not because necessarily there'll be sort of commercial launches of 5G in 2018, but more in the sense that there's a meeting of 3GPP, which we are hosting. 3GPP is the global standard setting body for mobile telecommunications technology. And I believe that meeting, which we're hosting on the Gold Coast in September, will be quite pivotal in terms of some of the pretty important early standard setting, which will then set the path for 5G, and we'll start to see some commercial rollouts, I suspect globally, from about 2019. I think you should look at the what we're going to be doing in Australia in April. We did some trials last year, but we're going to expand those in 2018. We've already sort of announced we'll be doing that on the Gold Coast from about April, but also follow the Winter Olympic Games, which is in June in Korea. I think the
Next month, Winter Olympics.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So follow that, and I bet the Korean Telecom and SK will definitely be sort of trialling 5G there as well. They'll be investing heavily in 5G. So I think for a whole range of reasons, 2018 is going to be still a lot of activity around 5G. And all of these things, of course, are interrelated because 5G delivers a new set of capabilities that will accelerate the rollout of Internet of Things types of applications. You're seeing the assistance and the artificial intelligence bedded in the assistance is an important ingredient in the whole Internet of Things. You're seeing an explosion in the number of applications and devices and use cases, particularly in the home, which again all interrelated. So they would probably be my key points, and I might just pause my comments there and we can go to questions in a minute, but I'll hand over to Robin to talk a bit more about what you've seen, Robin, and I know you've got some important announcements to make.
Yes, so I'm very pleased to be here at CES. It's my first CES. Most of my career I've been in the enterprise space in terms of technology companies, but actually the key takeaway for me is really around connectivity being king or queen in the consumer space, especially as IoT and the derivatives of things roll out. And everything's connected, and it's connected in multiple ways, not just with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or any other protocols like Zigbee, but also increasingly on the 5G network as well, and obviously today 4G. So the thing we are announcing today is actually we're now live with our narrowband IoT. We in August rolled out Cat-M1. We're now live, which is obviously Australia's largest Cat-M1 network. We already do a significant amount of IoT business in Australia and have the largest network on that front. We rolled out in August of last year our Cat-M1 capabilities, just over 3 million square kilometres of coverage with our Cat-M1. And today we're announcing our narrowband IoT is live in all of the major cities in Australia, both capital cities as well as regional towns and cities. And that's important because the difference between the two protocols you probably already know, but from a Cat-M1 perspective, that's really good at connecting things in the hundreds of kilobits per second, so with an extended range and long battery life. And that will enable things like health devices to be rolled out more ubiquitously. I don't know about the smart pillow, but I'm sure it's sending lots of things back up to the cloud to analyse your sleep patterns. That's the type of thing that Cat-M1 enables. On the narrowband, it's actually for the smaller sensors, sending even smaller bits of data back up, which is really important for things like agriculture, things in the ground to measure moisture levels, fertiliser levels, connected cows, that type of thing. So very important for that. Obviously logistics and transport as well, where there's small packets coming up that aren't moving very fast. So that's the type of use cases for those. So we're pretty excited about that. This is part of the investments that we've been making. So coming back full circle, the things that we're investing in with the up to $3 billion across all of the networks and also in our digitisation platform is enabling things to be connected as well. So I also very encouraged by the amount of 5G discussion here at CES. I wasn't expecting that until Mobile World Congress, quite honestly. But what it proves to me is that as we move forward here, that connectivity, whether it's on the cellular network, which is obviously a very secure network, or whether it's on the Wi-Fi or extended range, Bluetooth, or those types of things are really important. And so it was very good to see some of the component manufacturers and the silicon guys actually talking a lot about their use cases around 5G, which I think are pretty interesting. So with that, I'll hand it to you to talk about some of the smart home areas.
Thanks, Robin, for that. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I'll talk about where we're at with smart home, some of the near-term future pieces of smart home. I also wanted to touch on the future of the market in this space for consumers in Australia, and then finally just touch a little bit beyond the home, because we're starting to turn our minds there as well. So as most of you would be aware, we launched Smart Home early last year in the Australian market, so bringing Internet of Things for Australian consumers, early into the market. And it's been clear this week at CES, as we've been learning and talking to partners, they're eager to know our experiences as well, because it is early stage. And I mean, you can't help, everywhere you go here at CES, smart home, connected devices in the home, it's certainly probably one of the top themes of the overall conference. So where we stand today with Telstra Smart Home, there are smart cameras, smart lights, smart power plugs, smart locks and smart thermostats that we have available in the range today. So we have 10, we launched with 10 devices. We built a platform so that we could keep curating new devices and bring them in, and right now we've got 15 devices that are integrated as part of that. What is important about our platform, and I think it's an important one particularly after a few days at CES, because everyone's doing their thing, we've built a platform where we wanted to ensure firstly we could curate and bring the best technology in to work with it, and then the devices inside the platform can talk to each other, which allows customers to put together their own scenarios and automations that fit their lifestyle. And if I give you an example, because that sounds all very theoretical, our head of smart home, who's here with us at CES this week, Ed, he has kids that he wants to know get home from school. No one's home when they get home. He has a sensor on his porch that has facial recognition, so it knows the kids have arrived. It talks via the platform to the video camera. The video camera triggers a short video and takes the kids coming in. It then talks to the platform and triggers a message to Ed that then plays him that short video to confirm, around 3:45 each day the kids have got home. So we built a platform that could give customers that ability to tailor it and have the devices work together rather than just individual devices. So that's an important part of it. As I said, we've gone from 10 from launch to 15 devices today. Most recently, we've added in a new water leak detector. Very important. I know Robin's had her own personal experience and is a big advocate of the water leak detector. Good to know if you've got a leak before it floods your house.
That's right.
We've got new lighting with Philips Hue has come into the range, and we've got a smoke alarm battery. So again, some of those key things that we brought in to our range. What we're seeing, just to give you a perspective for our customers who are taking smart home, on average they connect about 4 to 6 devices right at the start. So that's on the first implementation of it. So you can see even from day one, it's quite a big number of devices, and with all the devices you see here and coming and being talked about, you can imagine that growing pretty fast. And I did want to talk a little bit about the evolution because it is moving incredibly fast. The other thing you probably can't walk away from CES, and Andy touched on it, is voice assistants. Now, mid last year, we were the world first from a carrier point of view, bringing Google Home and Google Assisted voice into our smart home platform. Now, it's really brought it mainstream. I think being able to talk to it and instruct and communicate in that way has made a massive difference. So just to give you a feel of the change it's made, from when we brought that in, we saw from a sales point of view a doubling in the volume of sales of smart home just by bringing Google Home integration in. And the other thing we've seen is customers who have Google Home and the voice integration versus those that don't. We see those that have it 4 times more engaged. So it becomes really intuitive to use smart home in the home once you've got that voice integration. So we're very focused. There will be obviously more voice assistants we expect coming this year into the Australian market. So again, our approach is to work with the best technology providers, bring that in, integrate it, and give our customers real choice, but in a way that those devices and technologies can work together for our customers. The other area is obviously artificial intelligence. It's getting talked about everywhere. And if I think about today, you can wake up at home and you can talk to your Telstra smart home via Google Assistant and tell it to turn on your coffee machine. In a year's time, maybe it will be, you don't have to do that. Maybe artificial intelligence is at a point where it realises you're awake and it anticipates and has the coffee machine already going by the time you're up. So certainly voice assistance and artificial intelligence, 2 key areas of focus. As Robin said, now we've got a narrowband IoT network live. We're also thinking about what are some of the use cases for that. One of the early things we're thinking about, as Robin said, it works well where you need sensors with low amounts of data needing to be transmitted. An example might be pool filters, because again, with narrowband IoT can work in environments where there's liquid and where it gets good coverage in through things. So that's one example. So as I said, we're really focused, what are those use cases that make sense for Australian customers? When we look at the future of the market, because I think it's exciting to see all this technology, but what do we think from a consumer point of view? Right now today, the average Australian household, in terms of total devices in the house, our research shows there's about 14 connected devices per household in Australia today. Current predictions are by 2021 that will more than double to around 30. We also expect in the forecasts we've seen that smart home as an industry by 5 years' time will probably generate revenues or consumer spend of about $1 billion. So it's significant. And when you think about the home services market today in Australia, very broadly, home services, not technology, but all home services, that's about a $50 billion per annum industry now. These technologies, I think, have an incredible ability to disrupt and provide new use cases and better ways to deliver those services to Australian consumers. So that $1 billion for smart home, I think it's fair to say it's probably conservative, and we see a lot of potential here. When we started our smart home journey, we did obviously do some research, but as you can imagine, for customers, it's pretty hard to imagine what's possible. And when we did that research, the 2 areas customers were most interested in as we entered smart home were really security in the home, and the second one was energy efficiency. And so that's where we focused early on. As we now get a little bit further in and we've been able to do some further trials, there are another couple of areas that are pretty exciting for us. We've done some trials around how the technology can empower people's lives, particularly those living with disabilities or those people with limited mobility. And really, this is where you start to see the difference it can truly make in someone's life. One of our participants is Melbourne-based. He lives in a shared home. He's 45 years old. He suffers from MS, so has limited mobility. Now, he had to rely on a carer to come and turn lights on and off, something as simple as that. Now, we set up Smart Home as part of the empowerment trial with the Google Voice Assistant integrated through Google Home, And you know, it's been pretty phenomenal to see, just in that one example, the sort of difference it has made where, you know, there's a lot of talk now about this idea of connected independence. So through this connectivity, as Robin said, that is so critical, you put the pieces together and actually you can provide for people a real change in their independence and freedom, and not having to rely on someone else to do things for them, suddenly put them back in control of some pretty simple and fundamental things. So that's been a really exciting area, and we see lots of potential there. The second area sort of linked to that is in-home care in general. You know, in Australia today, one in 5 people identify as having a disability, and once you get to 75 years or older, that moves to 1 in 2 people. So we know this in-home care environment is going to be incredibly important, and with the technology, with our smart home technology, working with some of the healthcare providers and through some of the digital health services, you know, we're pretty excited about the part we can play there to help to bring that to life in Australia as well. So that's another area of future focus for us right now. So I might just wrap up. So there's obviously a lot around the home, and you can tell we're pretty excited. Got lots of ideas out of the last few days here at CES. But when you put our network capability together, particularly as Robin just talked about with CAT-M1, with narrowband IoT, with our amazing mobile network, we're now thinking about how it moves beyond the home as well. And yes, there's a lot of enterprise use cases around location and tracking, and we are doing some work around what that might mean in the consumer space. So I would watch that space this year for us. We're working on some exciting things there that gives people peace of mind in the home, but also can take it beyond the home to give them that peace of mind for their family as well. So there's some of the things we're focused on. So John, I might hand back to you.
No, well, thank you. Could I just maybe sort of bring it back to strategy? I mean, so, you know, I stated 3 years ago that our vision is to become a world-class technology company that empowers people to connect. And that wasn't about moving away from being a telco. It was about recognising what a telco needs to become in the future. And it's very much about the applications and services that you're seeing materialise here at CES, and building the technology capabilities that are critical for us to ensure that those applications and services work best on Telstra's network than anybody else's, and that we can deliver them with the network experience which is critical to bring them to life, whether it's the smart home, whether it's digital media, whether it's, you know, drones, or you know, whatever devices, autonomous driving, whatever it may be. Virtually everything in the world that can be connected will be connected in the future, and all of this tech innovation relies on a high quality, fast, reliable, safe, secure and smart network, and that's what our vision has been, and that's why we're increasing the level of investment that we are in the business at the moment, and making the transformational change we need to be what a telco needs to look like in the future, and that's building a new suite of skills that we haven't had as deeply as our traditional network engineering skills. And I think that, you know, many of the foundations we've laid, whether it's in the smart home, whether it's in our enterprise applications and services, are really sort of, whether it's in the Internet of Things with these foundational capabilities around CAT-M1 and narrowband, are really the platforms that I think are going to enable us to, you know, most importantly, deliver great solutions to our customers, but also provide growth and, you know, value growth for our shareholders as well. So John, I might hand back to you. And
Thanks. So we'll throw to questions. If you can just, I know we all introduced each other at the start, but if you can just say your name and where you're from as you ask the question, that'd be appreciated. So we'll go to John.
John Davidson from the Financial Review. Just with the narrowband IoT stuff, does it plug into your smart home suites? Would you set a rule, for instance, that a narrowband vehicle tracker can trigger your coffee maker or your air conditioning as you get home? Is that already the case, or is that?
Yeah, so narrowband's the technology that actually is provided over the mobile network. So so essentially you saw a lot of devices here. So basically it's the protocol that enables that. And the two key characteristics of it is that it's a small amount of data backwards and forwards, mainly up into the cloud or into you know, an edge compute environment. And so it's a small amount of data, and it also has very long battery life. So we're talking years in terms of battery life. So whether it's under the ground, it has a very small battery, but the battery life is there for a long time. Whether it's in the basement of a building, you know, part of a utility type of infrastructure. So it enables those use cases. Then what happens is if it's connected into, so if it's a smart sensor under the ground and it's going to connect into a smart home, then that would be via some sort of protocol. But normally it will be over the mobile network. So basically using 4G at the moment, 4GX that we have, which we've doubled the speed and the capacity of that network over the last year. It will enable that to actually be uploaded so that it can go into some sort of database or program to then do something with it.
But does it go into the smart home platform already?
So that's the work we're now doing. So today with Smart Home, the protocol we're using is Zigbee on our home hub. And so now that we've got narrowband IoT and Cat-M1, that's the work to do.
Yeah. How
we now integrate those. But that's the goal, like where you're headed with it. Technically, it's not working that way today because the technology is just up and running, but that's exactly where you could have that sort of use case you talked about.
Yeah, but the one thing is the case is that we think by enabling these technologies on the mobile network today, we'll be able to create an ecosystem of device manufacturers or inventors even in Australia. So that's one of the things that we're really focused on with our incubator strategy around Mura-D and our IoT labs, is to get Australian entrepreneurs to actually use the protocol that we have in the network. That's an open standard protocol for that's global, to actually create devices that then can be connected either in the home or on the enterprise platforms or small business platforms, and create new revenue streams for themselves and the country and that type of thing. Does that make sense?
Alex?
Alex Gibbon from Finder. So in a consumer sense, is the intent at some future stage to be delivering Telstra branded IoT devices, or are you simply looking at being the network provider that someone will bring a Philips IoT Hue Globe or something into?
Yeah, so as I said, our focus is absolutely to give customers choice. So there's a lot of good devices you can see we've integrated today and will continue to integrate. There are some areas we're looking at where we are exploring and looking at some of our own branded devices where we don't see in market quite what we need for the Australian environment. So so we want to keep options open. If we can't find from a third party, then we are looking at some of our own where it makes sense.
And on the enterprise side, as you know, we've made some acquisitions in the vehicle side, so with MT Data. That uses the same type of protocols that we're talking about here to enable fleets and logistics and transport areas to happen as well. So
and I think,
so there'll be some Telstra branded.
It'll be both.
Yeah. It'll be both. So I think as you saw this week, there's a lot of different devices, and some people, some consumers will go best of breed and do their own integration, but they need a platform, and others will want it out of the box. Don't ask me how it works. I'm just going to plug it in. Yeah. So I think it'll be both.
I'm obviously interested in the 5G stuff for the Gold Coast. Are you able to expand on that, how the trials went, where you're going next year as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, so we did a bunch of trials last year, and Robin can speak more about it, but voice calls, data, etc. Lots of obviously in the lab environment. The Commonwealth Games is obviously coming up on the Gold Coast, and we thought therefore that would be a great location on which to do expanded trials, because you've got a large number of people in a particular area at one time, a lot of media interest, a lot of content being downloaded, etc. So we're doing some pretty extensive trials on the Gold Coast. And then, as I mentioned, we're also hosting by coincidence 3GPP, which is the global standard setting body where they're meeting on the Gold Coast in September. And we've always been very, very active in the process of setting standards for mobile technology globally. One, because we're seen as a thought leader and innovation leader from a technology perspective. And two, though, because it's important that we make sure that the particular demographic and geographic characteristics of Australia are taken into account when those standards are set. And so, the process is that, you need to get basically equipment manufacturers, so handsets, chipsets, the radio access equipment manufacturers, the Ericssons, the Huawei's of the world, the operators. Everybody's basically got to ultimately align and agree on the technology standards, because otherwise you can't migrate to a new technology, because all the equipment has to actually be built in line with it, including also the spectrum bands as well. And so we've always played a very active role in that global process to make sure that, as I say, the characteristics of Australia get taken into account. So we're hosting that meeting, and I think that's going to be a pretty pivotal meeting in the whole 5G, the 5G evolution. So, Robin.
Yeah, I mean, we like doing world first and definitely regional first. So we just before Christmas had the first calls in the lab over 5G technology. So on the Gold Coast, we actually have some of our 5G labs today, and we'll be using those a lot in the trials that Andy referenced. So yeah, it is very. We just happen to also have quite a good amount of our deep technical expertise in Queensland. Our head of networks lives in Brisbane, as you probably know, Mike Wright. Our head of wireless actually also lives in Brisbane as well. So the Gold Coast is a good place, and as Andy mentioned, the standard setting body being hosted by us there is important. And some of the characteristics that Andy alluded to, particularly around range, is really important for the Australian environment. So if you're in Europe, it doesn't matter as much. In the US, it doesn't matter as much. But with the unique characteristics of the size of the continent and the relative sparsity of population, you've got to make sure that the standards remember that it's you need to be able to support 100 kilometres, on particular categories of technology. So that's what we make sure we do, and we've got a very good representation on those standards.
So the Com Games trials, will that just be like around the Metricon or Carrara Stadium area, or?
So they're not actually associated with the Commonwealth Games. Yeah. They're actually associated with the Gold Coast, and around the labs and stuff like that. We haven't really talked through publicly what we're going to do in terms of the trials, but they will be based out of our labs there.
We're not a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games, and it's important that I clarify that we're not a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games, but we, the dynamics of the Commonwealth Games and what it means in terms of people flow and traffic and everything else that create an interesting environment within which things to test.
Yeah, with any big event like that in Australia, we make sure that we have capacity and we roll in cells, we do a whole lot of stuff around events like that, so that the experience the customers have on our networks is second to none. But with this other event being on the Gold Coast, that's a good focus area for us to do some of our more extensive trials.
Alex Zardovoort from IT Wire. So with these trials underway, I mean you've got the 3GPP standard setting that's still happening later this year. But we still have people like AT&T saying that 5G is going to be rolled out from 2019. Originally they were saying 2020, and you'd see probably by 2025 5G everywhere, the way we have 4G today. So when do you think we'll start actually seeing Telstra installing 5G networks so that you can start saying, hey, we have all the capital cities, the CBDs and the airports with 5G, and you can now buy 5G phones from us the way you've done with 3G and 4G over the past decade? Yeah,
sure. Well, firstly, I'm not going to completely declare our hand, as you would understand. Secondly, nobody can roll out 5G until the standards are set. And
in commercial deployment.
Yeah, in commercial deployment, the standards are set. The radio access network manufacturers, the Ericssons, the ZTEs, the Huawei's, the Nokias of the world are actually building the RAN equipment to put on the towers. The handset manufacturers are developing the handsets, the chipset manufacturers are putting
all that has to come together.
That all has to happen. I think that, realistically, that all coming together, 2018 is going to be a big year. If it all comes together in 2018, it will only be at the very end of 2018, but it's feasible, absolutely, that there will be commercial rollouts from 2019. And Telstra's, our position has always been to be at the forefront of technology innovation, and so you should assume that we will be a leader and very much an early roller out of 5G technology.
Well, and I think it's also fair to say that there's a lot of work that has to be done even before the RAN and the handsets, which is a lot of the work that we've been doing on the Networks of the Future program that Andy announced a year ago. So much of the up to $3 billion investment that we're spending on the network side is actually to enable the network to get a lot of these devices onto the network. So, announcing the narrowband today, we've done Cat-M1. We're also expecting significant volumes of traffic in terms of video and that type of thing. So we've upgraded our transmission network in a fundamentally significant way in terms of the major fibre routes around Australia. That's already done. So there's a lot of various steps that you've got to go through before you can actually make those first commercial deployments, let alone make the first commercial calls as well. So, but it's very exciting. I actually think it's a great time for Australia. And
we've got all the talk about 5G, but we just saw 2G switched off last year. How long has 3G got left before it gets switched off?
Quite a bit, actually. There is. We've got a really good network from a 3G perspective. 4G, we've actually just before Christmas announced the fact that we're at over 90% at double the speeds that we were at before when we first rolled out 4G a few years ago. So these things do take time. There are a lot of devices that are connected into those networks as well. So we don't have any plans at this point to switch that network off. It will happen at some point, but not in the near term.
You'd mentioned one of the focuses for Telstra was in-home care, and there's a lot of work in that area in things like therapeutic robotics. Is that an area you're actually investigating, or are you more looking at small-scale sensors and kind of the existing home stuff integrating within a care environment?
Certainly on the consumer side at the moment, we're more in that latter part, looking at what we can do more near term. Now, we've got teams that are looking at all sorts of, particularly out of the CTO's office.
And in the health area as well, there's convergence there between the devices themselves and data that exists around different areas. So I think there's a big opportunity for that in Australia overall, just given the demographics of the population and also how particularly if you're in regional Australia, getting into good medical care and that type of thing. I think there are some very interesting areas that people are working on.
And if you think about health from our perspective, I mean, it's one of the areas that we identified, several years ago as a pretty critically important area that we could actually help the industry, progress in terms of quality of service and productivity through technology. And so we've got this touch point through the consumer business that Vicky has spoken about, and the comments that Robin has made. We also, through the enterprise side of our business, we service most of the major health providers in Australia, the hospitals, the government Department of Health. We do a lot of work for all of those from a technology perspective. And of course we have Telstra Health, which is one of our growth businesses, which is providing remote diagnostics, electronic medical records, electronic prescriptioning. We just actually turned on the National Cancer Registry for cervical cancer. We're rolling out bowel cancer registry for the government as well. And so, technology, I think, can play a really critical role in improving the quality of service and, as I say, the efficiency and productivity of the health system. And we've laid a lot of foundations over the last 3 or 4 years in relation to that.
NBN versus 5G.
Yes.
But given the recent developments, what's your position and thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think, Tanya, I mean, the question always gets sort of put forward in a binary way, and, you know, life's not binary. And so by that, what I mean is, you know, the question's often posed, well, so is 5G going to mean that replaces the NBN? And the answer is no, absolutely not. I always have had a strong point of view that all technologies will be important in providing and satisfying the demand for connectivity and the volumes of data that we expect to see in the future. And to put it into context, today, on average, customers sort of download around 3 gigabits per month of data on a mobile device.
Gigabytes.
Yeah, and 150 on fixed, so 50 times as much. So to build that sort of capacity on mobile would require an enormous capital investment, which means that ultimately it will never replace it. Now, having said that, at the same time, there is no doubt that, you know, there are more customers that ultimately are going to go to mobile only. So I expect the proportion of customers that just rely on a mobile device for connectivity and internet and phone services and not necessarily have a fixed internet service at home will increase over time. What that percentage is going to be, I mean, time will tell, but that will definitely increase. But no, mobile would never replace fixed completely. But with 5G coming along, it will absolutely provide a solution for a higher proportion of customers which will be happy to be mobile only.
I mean,
Sorry to interrupt you. Have you got any sort of insights into how many Australians currently have mobile and fixed, and what forecasts are for what the conversion might be to just mobile?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously with the rollout of the NBN, the government's policy is obviously that everybody has a fixed internet access available. I would say at the moment it's probably around, you know, in the low 80% in terms of fixed broadband penetration in Australia, maybe 84, 85%. Vicky. And then in terms of mobile penetration, well, there's, I think, somewhere in the region of 33, 34 million mobile SIOs in Australia at the moment, and 25 million people. So I mean, you know, penetration is up
So
in
the sheep have mobiles.
some people have more than one phone.
Some people like me
Have more than one.
have more than one device. But, you know, I think, you know, penetration is obviously very, very deep from a mobile perspective. The other interesting thing goes back to one of the things we were saying earlier, is that actually smartphone penetration in Australia is one of the highest in the world. So I think, you know, next to someone like Japan, it's probably the highest. So smartphone penetration is now in the 90%, which is not the case, you know, for example, here in the US. There's still a lot of, you know, people using feature phones, non-smartphones. So we're very early adopters of technology.
I was just simply going to say, if the cost of mobile was the same as the cost of fixed, people would be downloading 150 gigabytes on their mobiles too.
That's right.
Probably I do, but not everybody.
but so think about it from this perspective. So I mean, in the end, basically, the two components to providing capacity and speed from a mobile perspective is the equipment. So, you know, the towers, the density of the towers, the radio access equipment, in conjunction with the spectrum. And those are the constraints to providing the transmission of data over radio waves. And then on the fixed side, basically you've got fibre or some other type of fixed connection into somebody's home. And even with 5G and what you're seeing here in the US, and what you mentioned, you know, the US carriers and what they're announcing, they're looking at, you know, using more and more mobile to potentially sort of provide access for fixed customers. But in the end, those small cells will have to be located quite close to the home, and they'll have to run fibre to those, essentially, to those small cells. So in a sense, you know, the difference between fixed and mobile is really what you're talking about. It's what we call the access layer. It's the point from me communicating to the next point of the tower.
It used to be the last mile, right?
Yeah,
now,
that's the point. It'll be the last 50 metres sort of thing. And so, to some extent, you know, there's a lot of convergence in them. And I think therein lies the answer. We need all of these technologies, ultimately, to provide the level of connectivity, the density, and the coverage of connectivity that the applications are demanding in the future. And some of the applications require high speed, low latency, high volumes of data, such as online gaming in the home, and others, such as an agricultural sensor in a field that's just, measuring moisture and, some other sort of chemicals in the soil, require very, very infrequent connection with very minimal amounts of data. And so, we need a whole sort of complex sort of environment of networks.
Sounds like a multi-technology mix.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
If the NBN had been fibre to the home, would you have used the NBN for the pico cells, the 5G tiny cells, to get it deeply penetrated into suburbs? Or would you have rolled out your own fibre?
We already have fibre to well over 90% of our mobile network in Australia, and I think we would have and we will continue to own very significant amount of fibre, particularly supporting our mobile network. And indeed, we own a lot of the fibre that the NBN is using as well, which is why we have a long-term contractual arrangements with them, so they can access our fibre, our exchanges, our ducts, etc. So no, we will continue to invest deeply into fibre.
So if you're talking about the last 50 metres, are you talking about rolling fibre into every street, or?
What? Sorry. No, you.
Yeah, so we already have fibre in a lot of streets, not every street. But the difference is NBN is doing the access. So basically how you access in the home the technology. What we have is the transmission network around the country. So basically from every cell tower back into the core of the network is a fibre route. That's what we've just upgraded around the country. But we have a lot of fibre into neighbourhoods, as Andy mentioned. That is what the pits, ducts, and fibre are really key assets for the country that we have that are being rented, if you like, by NBN in neighbourhoods today. So there's a lot of talk about fibre, but there's a lot of places where fibre exists. Obviously, not every house in Australia will have fibre going from the pit to the premise. That's
Well, but with fibre to the node, all those nodes in all those streets, so there should be tons of fibre in the streets, just not to the people's houses. But 10 years ago, they used to talk about a lot of dark fibre. Is there much dark fibre still left, or is it all lit up now?
Dark fibre, as in not
unused.
Unused.
Yeah.
There is some. Yeah, there is dark fibre. Yes.
How long until it's all lit up?
Well,
I think
we just added more capacity, right?
Sure.
So hopefully it'll never be all lit up, right? That's otherwise you're going to end up with a very congested network. So from the point of view of making sure that we anticipate usage, you want to make sure that you've got capacity there.
But the other piece is there's the fibre and then there's the electronics.
Right.
And so the fibre is just obviously physical glass, which is laid in the ground. Well, to Robin's point, a lot of the stuff that we've been doing in the optical transmission upgrade is upgrading the electronics with new technology, which actually gives you more capacity, faster speeds through the fibre.
Which was one of the advantages of fibre. You just have to upgrade the bits on the end and
absolutely. Or put in more repeaters, and that goes. It's the same on the submarine cable network internationally as well. We can increase the capacity, increase the speeds.
All right, we might have to.
Can I get a question from the phone, please?
Yes, please. Sorry, who's that?
This is Ray from the Zero from my team.
Okay, right. Go ahead.
All right.
Okay. I just wanted to. There was a small paragraph in the press release about a smart city partnership with Tasmania and I believe Launceston. I just wanted to get a bit more information about that partnership and also understand a bit about why the choice of Launceston, given that it already has a community-based LoRa network, particularly for IoT.
Yeah, it's a very good example of the type of partnerships that I think will happen around smart cities. So the convergence of smart devices and consumer behaviour, and how you actually bring that to bear for society's good, is basically one of the examples that we're talking about here with Launceston. So What we've found over the years is, you know, many of the governments or areas around Australia are actually good early adopters of technology, and so this is a good example of, you know, a partnership where we will bring the technology. Tasmania was also one of the first areas that we rolled out the increased in capacity for the transmission network as well. So we found that it was a you know, very forward-thinking area in terms of adoption, and you know, our team in Tasmania is very good at you know, encouraging these types of partnerships. So it is a good example of what can happen when, you know, the connectivity is there, the ecosystem starts to happen, and then the partnership with, you know, some of the regional governments happen as well. And the other part of this is there's also an incubator play or strategy there as well to encourage local entrepreneurs to work through developing new devices that can be used on the network and you know, used in real use cases with the government in Launceston.
And I think, Ryan, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I mean, you know, from the government's perspective, the government's got a major redevelopment happening in Launceston. It's about a $300 million project to relocate Launceston University closer into the centre. And there's a big redevelopment of the centre in Launceston, which is part of, I guess, Hobart's really developed over the last, you know, 5 to 10 years with the gallery there, and they're sort of seeking to make an investment in Launceston to, you know, really elevate Launceston as well. And so it's very much part of that overall project, and they've come to us to help them, you know, really do that in a very digitally enabled way with that whole redevelopment. Cool.
And have they given any indication, or have you given any indication about what kinds of smart city projects you may participate in, or that your network may be conducive to enable?
Well, you know, they're obviously looking at the obvious areas. I mean, ultimately, that's one of the things that we're helping them with. And so, when you think about it from a smart cities perspective, you've got to have the foundational infrastructure in place. And then you've got to sort of prioritise the business cases, whether it's around smart metering or whether traffic management or waste management, all those sorts of areas. But that's one of the things that we're working with them at the moment, is both helping them sort of design and provide them with the core infrastructure platforms, and then actually helping them, you know, think through what are the business cases and where can they prioritise those investments. So that's the work that we're doing for them. And the next phase will be starting to sort of, I guess, build that into the overall development project, which is at a relatively early stage.
All right, we're going to have to
Okay, thanks.
wrap things
Thanks,
up.
Rob.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for getting up so early.
Yeah, thanks for. Must be 2:30 or 3 o'clock over there.
Oh,
so.
that's about
5:24.
5 or 6, I think.
I don't know. He's in Japan.
Oh, sorry. Oh, well, you just stayed up late.
So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to shoot them through to me or Steve, and we'll help you out. So.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And have